Welcome to Mortification of Spin, a casual conversation about things that count, with Carl Trueman and Todd Pruitt, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. Let's join this week's conversation.
You are listening to Mortification of Spin. My name is Todd Pruitt, and I am the pastor of Covenant Presbyterian Church in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And I'm joined, as always, by my friend and co-host, Carl Trueman, who is a professor at Grove City College. Carl, great to see you today. We're actually recording in person, which we don't get to do that often, and so I'm sort of enjoying the glow of your presence.
And so you should. Yeah. I think being with me for a day would be a tonic for anybody.
Absolutely. And it's the fact that we are embodied persons, not trapped in a matrix of some sort of an evil genius. We are not cyborgs, after all, which brings us to the topic at hand. I'm excited about our guest today. He is co-author of a really important and excellent book. His name is Joshua Pauling. He's the vicar at All Saints Lutheran Church, which is a congregation of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. It's in Charlotte, North Carolina. He is a classical educator. He's a contributor to Salvo. And I read also that he's a furniture maker, which might figure in somewhat to the discussion of the topic at hand. And he is, along with Robin Phillips, the author of a new book entitled Are We All Cyborgs Now? Reclaiming Our Humanity from the Machine. Joshua, great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
It's a privilege to be with you guys today. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the first question is, are we all cyborgs now?
Yes, it actually might be helpful to have the term cyborg defined for our audience. As you know, my mind goes to Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator, or in a more sophisticated moment, Harrison Ford in the original and best Blade Runner. But Joshua, could you define cyborg for us and for our audience in the way you're using it in the book?
Yeah, definitely. Certainly has a sci-fi tradition in its use. But cyborg, just at its simplest, is a machine-human hybrid, right? A combination in some way of a machine and a human. And we're using it provocatively in the title to really raise the question that we all are dealing with when it comes to technological matters and the blending of the human with the machine, right? And there are actual ways this happens in everyday life. If you think of a person who's connected to a dialysis machine during dialysis, they're sort of maybe a cyborg for a moment, right? There are certain technologies like prosthetics that could literally be a combination of a machine and a human in some way. But we really are trying to get to the more subtle meaning of what we call the cyborg creep in the book. And that's that even if there is no, implantation of a chip in our brain or some actual melding of a machine and a human, the way we live in the digital age, we've already become cyborgs, right? We're living through this technologically mediated environment, right? What I call the digital world is a reality mediating mechanism, a habitat in which we live, right? And so that's what we're trying to raise people's awareness of in the book, not the doomsday scenarios of the Terminator or something like that, but the more subtle ways we're being catechized by the machine to live as machines.
You dedicate this book to the late Neil Postman, who is author of a classic book I read while I was in seminary, Amusing Ourselves to Death. Some of our readers have no doubt heard about it or have read it. Postman died in the early 90s, correct?
2002, I believe.
Oh, 2002, okay. But before, so much has changed in the last 20 years. What was Postman warning us about?
Yeah, he's a pivotal figure in all this for sure, which is why we dedicated the book to him. Yeah, he died, I believe it was actually 2003, so he's right on the cusp of all this stuff, right? And what he was warning us about is how technologies are not neutral, right?
Right.
That's really the essence of what he was doing. And he was building on a whole tradition of the philosophy of technology with people like Marshall McLuhan and Harold Innis, and even further back like Lewis Mumford and others. And he was popularizing that discourse and making people aware of this tradition, especially in relation to the television and mass media, right? That was really his age. But as his own life went on and he saw the emergence of the computer, towards the end of his life, he really started to shift more as well towards the computer. In the late 90s, he gave an address to the German Informatics Society, which is some computer society in Germany at the time, and it was called Informing Ourselves to Death, right? He saw also computers being implemented in the classroom more, and how that everything was being billed as that the computer's going to solve all our problems, right? Access to information is going to solve all our problems. And he was already warning that, no, that's not going to solve our problems, and it's really never been our problem. The problem is, how do we make sense of information, right? How do we organize information within a unified whole, right? So yeah, he was warning about this. Many other philosophers of technology were as well. And we're trying to, in our book, sort of bring Postman's argument up to speed, if you will, and also tap into those other philosophers of technology that have so much to offer, but a lot of times are obscured in philosophical language, or just people aren't aware of it because it's older or whatever. So.
Right.
How would you respond, Joshua, to somebody who might say, okay, what it means to be human is transformed by the technology that we have available to us? But human beings have always been technological creatures. We're not animals of pure instinct. As soon as somebody picked up a piece of flint and used it to cut down a tree or whittle a branch, they were transforming their relationship to the world around them and thus transforming themselves. What would you say to somebody who would say, well, yeah, technology is, okay, it's not neutral, it transforms us, but how do we get back to some kind of normative understanding of what it means to be human in order to be able to relate critically to the technologies that are available to us? Is that even possible?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I'll sort of take that piece at a time here, and feel free to redirect if we need. First off, yes, I think it's very important to recognize and acknowledge that we have always been creating tools and technologies and using them, right? Even before the fall in the garden, we were told to take dominion, right, and to cultivate the garden, which would imply some form of tool use, most likely, right? Adam and Eve probably weren't using their hands to dig. But of course, that's somewhat conjecture there. But yes, the whole history of humanity is a history of tool use and tool development. But as we shape our tools, then so our tools shape us, right? And we know this even with simple tools. If you have a hammer, the saying goes, everything looks like a
Nail. Yeah.
nail, right? We know that. That even a simple tool like a hammer alters our perception and experience of things, right, to a certain degree. It makes us want to hammer things. Now, it's not deterministic, but it certainly nudges us in that direction. But now we're not carrying around hammers, right? We're carrying around omni-tools, as we call them in the book, or reality-mediating mechanisms, which I think are significantly different than prior technologies, which tended to be static or single-use technologies, right? The way we interact with the digital screen, whether it's a laptop, a computer, or a smartphone, or an iPad, is very different than the way I interact with my hammer in my workshop, right? The hammer doesn't talk back, and it's a one-use tool. I put it on the wall when I'm done with it, right? And I go get it when I need it. But because of the sort of multi-purpose use nature of these digital devices, they much more become habitats and environments from which we live within, right? And then that, I think, is really what we need to get at with why they're different, right? Whether they're categorically different, we could have an argument about, but they certainly are different in their extent, in their use, right? Another way to think of it is, a lawnmower is a very complex technology, or a dishwasher is a very complex technology, right? But I don't live in my dishwasher or in my lawnmower the way I can live within the digital environment and ecosystem.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that would be maybe the first part of what you were asking. Do you want to expand on the second part there about a normative understanding of human nature? Or
Yeah, because I think there's so many moral and ethical issues that are popping up. Particularly, I think for in this program we try to tailor things to some extent to what pastors are wrestling with. And, I'm fascinated by, reproductive technologies, IVF, surrogacy, things like that, which I think a lot of pastors intuitively would have thought, certainly 5 years ago, are good things because they allow childless couples to have children. The couple desire a good thing. IVF, surrogacy delivers these good things. And yet, when you start to think about what that technology does to our humanity and how we think, for example, of children and how we think of parenthood, it begins to raise serious questions. But then that also then pushes us back to that further question. Okay, when do we, with medical technology, for example, decide that this is restoring something that should be there but isn't? And when does it transcend or transform what is there? So that's that's of interest to me, because I think a lot of pastors are facing ethical problems for which there are no proof texts in the Bible, if you like. They need to have a rich understanding of what it means to be human, to adjudicate moral issues, many of which, of course, track to the incredibly brilliant technological innovations of the last 50 to 100 years.
Precisely, and that's exactly what we're trying to do in the book, is connect these technological dots with anthropological questions, right? Because as you've said in many places, better than I could say, the defining question of our age is, what does it mean to be a human, right? And Christians have the best answer to that, right? We have the real answer to that. And we need to bring that to bear on all of these moral, ethical questions, societal questions, which also at their root many times connect to these technological questions, right? We need to go back to what it means to be a human, theological anthropology, right? A human being is a body and soul, right? The union of body and soul, made in God's image. There's a goodness to the body and physicality more generally, right? And the human being is a creature, right? That's really important, that we are a created being, a relational being. We're not completely autonomous individuals. And as a creature, we have inherent limits. And so that's going to have to guide how we think about a lot of these ethical and technological questions, and make sure that we're not using technologies to, as you said, transcend our inherent good limitations, but maybe restore capabilities that as a result of the fall have been distorted, destroyed, and so forth. Yeah, so that bumps up to all types of questions, as you said, reproductive technologies, right? Questions of even transgenderism, right, are also related to the technological question that seems to make it possible to transcend your bodily limitations. I would say, honestly, that transgenderism is really a subset of transhumanism.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, and that type of all of those things become more plausible and palatable in the digital environment, because we're living in a disembodied way in the digital environment, right? We've already bought into the mind-body dualism if we're living life completely behind a screen, which then makes it easier to think that, well, I can actually be a woman, right, if I'm a man, because my digital identity is already divorced from my bodily identity in pretty significant ways, right? So all these things fit together for sure.
Not just limits, of course, but also teleology as well. One might add to that.
Yes, definitely.
The end of the body is
That's
disrupted.
Right. The design, the purpose, the goal. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
One of the things we've been, I've seen it in my life. I see it in the lives of the families that I serve as pastor, is the dehumanizing impact of social media. Jonathan Haidt has been, warning about smartphones and social media and the impact it has on particularly young people and children on their mental health. And certainly in my conversations, and this is anecdotal, but in my conversations as a pastor of a church with a lot of people in it, this has been very much a concern of parents who I talk to, and of teenagers I talk to, the anxieties, the stresses, because the online social media behavior of people can be very, very cruel. And it's cruel because it enables us very easily to dehumanize someone else, because we don't have to be in their presence.
It's cheap.
It's cheap,
It's low risk.
Exactly.
From the agitator's perspective.
The way my wife described it was, when she was in high school, if there was conflict, and there often was, between friend groups and groups of girls, once they left school, they were unplugged from that. They didn't have iPhones or social media. And so by the next day, it was either forgotten or largely tamped down. Now, our kids leave school and they're never unplugged from it. Every conflict escalates, and it gets worse when they are out of each other's presence. And yet at the same time, I'm so grateful that I can always know where my wife is. If there's ever a problem, she can grab her phone, call me, vice versa. And so there's this wonderful benefit of having this ability to always reach one another. And yet, the unchecked side effects and the ways that sin has exploited this always being plugged in, particularly not in the presence of other people, this disembodied.
Sure. That's right. It's disembodying by its very nature, right? And again, it's a modern blessing for sure, right? This conversation is enabled by it as well, right? But we'd be foolish not to recognize its inherent limitations and the way it's nudging us towards thinking about ourselves, each other, and the world, right? And again, that's what we're trying to do in the book. We're looking at all these different situations and scenarios and trying to get behind those issues to the more foundational questions of who are we, who is God, what is the world, right? But yeah, Haidt is a great figure in this. He's been very influential for sure. But I think we need to go further, right? He's really throwing up a huge softball for Christians to hit out of the park, right? When it comes to how we have the answers to the questions he's asking, and also the community within which we can really address these issues, right? The embodied community of the church, where we are suffering with one another, partaking in joys with one another, forgiving one another, and also partaking in the very life-giving reality of Christ himself through the Word and the sacraments, right? We can go further than Haidt does.
Exactly.
But certainly he's an important source to be interacting with, and we do that in the book somewhat. And definitely exciting to see the tide turning on some of these issues. And I think, again, Christians really can be out in front on these things.
And you raise in the book that issue of how Christian liturgy, and particularly our gathered worship in spaces that are dedicated for worship, can offer a response to this. But the problem is that in too many evangelical churches, again, the opportunity to unplug has been, church leaders have taken that away from their people, so that even in the time of gathered worship, we still have them plugged in. And you make some I think, incredibly helpful recommendations that for some churches would just be out of the question, but ought to be seriously considered, things that are just now taken for granted in a lot of evangelical churches, to do this very thing, to kind of return us to the importance of an unplugged, embodied connection within worship. I wonder if you just unpack that a little bit about, some of these things that you're encouraging churches to maintain or to stop doing.
Yeah, sure. This is a huge area, something I've reflected on in other places as well for modern Reformation and various speaking engagements. And it's obviously a controversial and difficult, contentious topic, but the experience of worship should be otherworldly, right? It should be sacred. And screens are penetrating enough in the rest of our lives and worlds, right? They don't need to be prominent and central in the worship life of the church for several reasons. One is that God has ordained the means by which he communicates his message and his salvation, right? And that's the word and sacrament. The preaching of God's word, right, and the partaking of his gifts together is the medium, if you will, that God has chosen, right? Now, certainly we can utilize technologies to do that, right? A book is a technology, right? A hymnal is a technology. But there's something, again, permanent, or at least more permanent about those types of technologies than the digital, right? The digital is inherently ephemeral, right? The words on the screen are there and then they're gone, right? Just think about the irony of singing about the word of the Lord enduring forever with words that are on a screen. And then those words disappear.
Right.
It's just a clash, right? So if the screen is central in the worship life of the church, we are, I would argue, creating a clash between the incarnational realities of Christ and his gifts for us, and the way that's being communicated to the people, right? Again, the medium is the message, right? Marshall McLuhan. That's very true in the worship life of the church. The medium that we're using to communicate our message is communicating something in and of itself. And my concern is that it's communicating something that actually might contradict the very incarnational realities of our faith, right? So that has obviously implications as to what we think the role of screen should be in worship. It also relates to streaming worship, how we should do that, if we should do that, right? Also relates to the role of the book, right? Physical texts being used in worship, all sorts of ways this could flesh out. But I think in general, we should think about worship as something that's just as possible in the first century as in the 21st century, right? And that would, again, thinking about technological aspects, that's going to maybe inform what we think the role of technology is in worship, or that the worship would be just as possible in a village in the heart of Africa as in a cathedral. Right?
Yeah. I was on a panel at Grove a couple of years ago. There was myself, a colleague of mine who's a Pentecostal minister, charismatic minister, and an Eastern Orthodox priest. And the audience asked the question, what does the panel think of online worship? And the Eastern Orthodox priest led out, and he just said, online worship is not worship. That was all he said. And I spoke next. I kind of slightly qualified that. I said, there are people who can't get to church. They're stuck indoors due to age or illness, and being able to see something online is better than nothing for those people. But then I added, I said, it would be useful if churches password protected their streaming. So that, if your streaming is for the shut-ins, it is for the people who can't get to church, then you know who they are, and you can send them a password. If you just put your stuff up online for anybody to see, you're not really just doing it for the shut-ins. You're doing it, maybe you're doing it out of the best of reasons as a service to the wider Christian community, but what you're possibly doing there is actually undermining in-person worship. And, I've said this before. Sorry?
Yeah, and you're communicating a message that this is sort of a one-to-one replacement, right? And obviously COVID brought these things right to the fore, and we're still reeling from that, and how do we now maybe backtrack on some of those things? But for example, in our church, we never streamed, and we don't stream. We record the service of the Word, and then we post that later with a little bit of a disclaimer, if you will, at the beginning that basically says that what you're receiving here is a blessing of hearing God's Word, right? But it's not the full experience of Christian worship, where you're in person, in the presence of God, right? And in the distribution of His gifts in person. So we hope to see you soon. That type of thing. And I think a lot of churches could do that, right? They could modify their practices slightly to still provide a service that's needed, but to make sure they're not unintentionally undercutting the heart of their ministry or communicating something that's contradictory, right? I agree with you that the streaming or recorded services can be a blessing to homebound members. Password protecting would be one way to make sure that they get access, but not maybe everybody else, right? And I think also it's a reminder of the importance of homebound ministry in general, right? The extraordinary care that takes place in person, right? That pastor and people are going to see the shut-ins to have that in-person reality experienced. And obviously that's time commitment and all that, but it's what we need to do.
Yeah, one thought I've had, because we, like so many places, started live streaming during COVID, and we still do, because we do have some homebound or shut-in members. But one of the things that concerns me, why I have mixed emotions about doing it, is because technology tends to make us think in terms of everything's usefulness. And so we can start thinking of worship in that way. Well, it's a useful thing, and so let's just get it out there. But that's not the way we think of, or it's not the way we're supposed to think of worship. It's not just this pragmatic, well, it's useful for me, so let's just get it online.
Didn't Marva Dawn write a book about it, sort of
she did.
Glorious waste of time or something on worship?
Sure. Two things, if I could add to that. One is the experience of worshiping, or again, I agree with what you said there, Carl, about whether online worship is truly worship. I think maybe we shouldn't use that term just to, again, to make it
The term online worship, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But the experience of doing that through a screen, you're in control, right?
Yes.
You can minimize the screen, you can change the volume, you can mute it, you can speed it up, you can slow it down, right? You can click X anytime you want. That confrontation with God's law, right? That convicts and God's gospel that comforts, right? Is obscured through the layers of the screen, and it's obviously fragmented as well. How do you really know the pastor's talking to you when you're behind a screen miles away at a different time or whatever else, right? There's all sorts of implications there to think about. And then, so that would be the first thing, that the experience of the device makes us think we're in control, right? And then the second thing I've raised at various points is, what are we communicating to our people if we're saying that they need a device in order to worship on Sundays if they're not in church, right? Why not do a reading and a prayer and a hymn from your own hymnal and Bible at home with your family if you can't come to church, right? That actually, I would say, might be more powerful for the children to see their father get the Bible out and a hymnal and pray together with them than having to have that mediated through a device from far away. Right? Again, just things to think about.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, it's been a great conversation, Joshua. Thanks so much for joining us. A lot to chew over there. I think all of our listeners would agree that technology is posing tremendous opportunities for getting the word out in ways that weren't possible before, but also tremendous challenges, and we're perhaps more aware often of the opportunities than we are of the problematic challenges. So I do want to thank you for coming on the podcast, Joshua. I want to commend this book. We We All Cyborgs Now? Reclaiming Our Humanity from the Machine by Robin Phillips and guest today, Joshua Pauline. Commend that to our listeners. Comes with commendations, I noticed on the back, from two friends of mine, Jeff Bilborough, colleague of mine at Grove City College, and Doug Farrow at McGill University, both of whom are very astute Christian cultural critics and thinkers and speak very highly of this book. So that is a very, very high recommendation. If you're listening and would like a chance to win a copy, please visit our website, mortificationofspin.org, and you can enter there for a chance to win a free copy. If you don't win a free copy, please buy a copy. I think this is a book that pastors and elders really should read, mark up, and inwardly digest. It will prove more and more helpful, I think, as the challenges of technology come at us thick and fast in the coming years. While you're visiting our website, please consider donating to Mortification of Spin. We are a listener-supported podcast. And beyond that, all that remains is to thank you for joining us today and say we look forward to being with you in 2 weeks' time.
Thanks for listening to Mortification of Spin, a podcast of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals. For more on topics like this, visit mortificationofspin.org, where you can find other articles by Carl and Todd, browse the archive of past episodes, and make a donation. We'll talk to you next time on Mortification of Spin.